Thank you, Erica, and everybody who's here today to brave our last day of the conference. Our talk today is going to be looking at eye movements. So we have some eye tracking data to examine, looking at whether or not expertise in knowledge about animals can be predicted by eye movements of the experts. So without further ado, I'll give you a little background. Most of our research is based on a phenomenon known in psychology world as the blink phenomenon. So some of you may have heard sort of the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, New York Times reporter who writes a lot about psychology and about science in general. But this sort of assertion is the idea that when you're an expert, you can look at a very small slice of information, in fact, just a few seconds worth, and make very distinct observations about what is going on. So for instance, people have looked at whether or not you can tell if a speaker is effective or whether a teacher is effective, simply by looking at about 50 to 100 milliseconds of data of them. They've looked at things like racial bias. How long do you have to look at a particular picture of somebody before you show bias or recognize that they belong to group A or group B? They've looked at it in terms of what I'm going to call, sort of in a colloquial term, gaydar, showing that research can actually, that people can, with just 50 millisecond slices, often determine this person we believe is homosexual versus heterosexual. And so one of the questions was, can we take this phenomenon and apply it to people looking at animals, so looking at a non-human entity, and also could we try to find some of the mechanisms underlying this? So we want to really look at these two goals. Number one, are people who work with animals a lot more able to quickly decide what kind of state they're in? And whether or not eye movements can give us some clue as to how these experts do it. And in fact, none of the other studies even done on humans have actually looked at eye movements to say, how is it they're doing this so quickly? Are they looking at different things? Are they looking at more things? What's going on here? So what we did was to get a group of experts and a group of novices. Our experts were 11 female animal keepers from various zoos in the Central Florida area. So some of you may know we actually live in Theme Park Central. So we had most of our keepers were actually from Disney's Animal Kingdom, which has a zoological park, a quite large one. And we also had, and you can tell that the average age was about 33, and the average expertise level was 12.92 years. So these are people who had been working in this field for quite some time, working with animals and looking at whether they were content or not. We had a novice match sample that was actually also females, but these were undergraduates. You can tell they are younger, yes. But more importantly, none of them had ever worked in an animal-related job. So none of them had even worked sort of in high school with animals or these types of things. So we wanted real novices. Now, most of them did, however, have interactions with animals. Some of them had pets, some of them had interacted with a dog or cat at some point in their life, but they did not work in these types of settings. Now, what we did was to show each participant 12 short video clips, and these video clips were extremely short, as you'll notice. They range from 4 to 10, let's see how competent I am at this, 4 to 10 seconds. And this one on the left, as you can tell, is a chimpanzee, and on the right is one of a dog. And we had 12 different animals, a giraffe, a mandrill, oryx, tapir, goat, elephant, cougar, rhinoceros, chimpanzee, orangutan, dog, and meerkat. All of these were recorded at zoos, or in other situations, the dog is actually one of our students' dog at a local dog park, so just to let you know. But all the other ones were recorded at zoos where none of these professionals worked or ever had worked, because we didn't want them to be able to say, hey, that's Bob, and Bob's doing great, and that's why I know that, this is something about it. We wanted to see if they could really make assertions about these animals quickly with very little knowledge of the specific animal we're talking about. So what they did was to watch each of these videos while eye tracked. And so some of you are probably more familiar with eye tracking than others, but participants wore a head-mounted eye tracker, and here's one of our former students wearing one of the eye trackers to give you an idea what they look like. And they will wear this while looking at stimuli on a screen. What they did was, this will measure exactly how long they looked at different items on the screen and how many times they paused to look at different items on the screen. After viewing each quick video, the person was supposed to rate how content do you believe the animal is. So 1 was, this animal was not content at all. 7 was, this animal is completely content. Now, the reason we chose this particular question was after working with a number of the keepers, not on this study, but other keepers, most of them said that was a question that they were most likely to be asked. And in fact, one of the co-authors on our paper, Mary Richards, was a keeper for 12 years. So she's one of the people who helped us get a lot of these keepers and got them involved in the study. And one of the things she said was that was what was most likely to happen, was that somebody, you know, their job during the day was to say, is this animal content? Are things, and I'm going to put this in quotes, good enough? Not necessarily was this animal excited, happy, overjoyed, but were they content? Afterward, and I'm not going to talk about it today, but if any of you have any questions, they also completed a series of questions all about their attributions of the animals. So afterward, after the eye tracker was removed, they saw all the pictures again, and they answered a number of questions about how attractive do you think this animal is? How nice do you think this animal is? I want to get to know this animal, a whole bunch of other questions that we can certainly tell you about. Now, there's a little bit to tell you about eye tracking before I talk about their particular results. And the first thing is that usually in eye tracking, we make a distinction between a fixation and a saccade. A fixation is when you stop for some number of seconds in one place, or roughly one place. In this case, we defined this as 700 milliseconds, so roughly a little over a little over 2/3 of a second that they stopped in one spot and paused and continued in that spot. A saccade is generally considered when you move between items. When I look here and I look there, so if I'm looking one place or the other. We did not look at saccades in this particular set of data, but one could look at how many times they move back and forth. So one of the things we were going to look at was the number of fixations, but also the length of the fixations. So assuming I stop and look at one of you, sorry, you got singled out, how long do I stop? Do I sit there, or do I just go, And so this gives us some idea of the person's attention. So are they looking at lots of things very quickly, or are they looking at a few things but spending more time there? And that was sort of one of the things we wanted to look at. So the way we analyzed our data was to do a 2 expertise by 12 animal type mixed ANOVA, and we did this for 5 different dependent variables. One was the number of fixations per second, and this was done per second because, as I mentioned earlier, some of the videos were a little longer than others, and so we wanted it to be reduced to how many times per second in that particular video. The average duration of each fixation, the contentment ratings. We also looked at the number of words used to describe the animal. So did they say things like, this animal is completely content, and I can tell because the ears were moving in this particular way, and the fur was moving in that particular way, and the animal was or was not pacing? Or did they say something like, yep, looks good? Okay, and by the way, sometimes they really do say things like that. We also looked at their confidence ratings. So did they say, 1, I have no clue what this animal is, and by the way, a lot of our novices said, yeah, looks good to me, kind of thing. Or did they say, I really feel strongly that this animal really is content or not content? So let's look at a little bit of data. The first thing that we noticed was that experts had more fixations per second than novices. So one of the things that these data really showed is in this expertise situation, the experts had more times that they stopped and paused. So they're doing more data from more different places in the film. So they're stopping, they're going dun, 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 dun. But the second thing we know is that each of those fixations was shorter than the counterpart for the novices. So what seems to be going on here is that novices are looking at a few places for a long period of time. Experts are looking at lots of places for a short period of time, which is kind of a nice finding. It suggests that experts know that they need to scan the entire environment, look for lots of places, but each one they're going to do very quickly. They're just going to go, yep, got that information, yeah, got that information. Whereas novices tended to get distracted, and they might do something like, oh, there's a rock over there. Ah, rock, oh yeah, and meanwhile the clock's ticking and the film's over. So these types of things. The second things we know was that experts as a whole rated the animals as more content. And we were a little surprised by this, I have to confess. We originally thought that the novices would be like, oh, they all look good, that's nice. But instead, the experts were far more likely to say the animals were content. And this is a finding we want to investigate a little further. We have not had a chance to look at a lot of the data with talking to them. But we also talked to each of them afterward about their experiences doing this. But one of the things we argue here is that, number one, most of these animals were taken, the videos were taken in situations where our expert trainer who was working with us argued also that they looked fairly content. So I think that one of the things might be that at least training was similar among these groups of experts. The second thing was we wondered if there was a little bias in the other direction, that these are people who work at zoos, and so when they see zoos and they see a zoo that looks like it's working in the same way as perhaps their zoo, they're more likely to say they're content. We also didn't know if the novices might be more biased to say things like, hey, I don't know. I don't think they looked that content because they had no idea what to look for. And so they were just more likely to say they weren't. But we're going to see a little interaction in a second with some of the animals and which animal we're talking about. We also found that experts generally had more confidence. No surprise there. They were more likely to say, I know that animal and I know that animal's content. Novices were more likely to kind of be like, I think I got it. We'll know that. Surprisingly, there were no significant differences in the number of words used by the experts or the novices, and a number of other analyses indicated that not only were their number of words similar, so were their choice of words. We were thinking that perhaps the experts or the novices, one might use more emotional terms. We coded for the number of times they said things like happy, excited, fun, these types of emotional terms. No difference. We coded for the number of times they even used words like he or she versus it. We thought this might be sort of an interesting thing looking at anthropomorphism. No differences. So it wasn't in their description, but they were looking at different things. Now, if you look at these are some of the data on fixations per second, actually broken down by expert and novice by animal type, because we wanted to give you a little feel for the idea that there were differences in terms of the type of animal. So these are the number of fixations, and you'll notice that for most animals, the experts actually had more fixations than the novices. Now, there are a couple very interesting differences, and I want you to call attention first of all, and I can't seem to figure out how to make this work. Maybe this one works. If you look right here at the dog, this was the one animal that was probably equally familiar to both the trainers, or the keepers in this case, and the novices. And you'll notice all of a sudden, they look identical. And so there's some evidence that expertise really did play a role in terms of the number of fixation. I want to call attention to one other one here, and this is the tapir. And the tapir was one of the only ones where the novices actually had more different fixations. Now, we're not quite sure why this is the case, but when we interviewed most of the trainers afterward, I keep calling them trainers, the keepers afterwards, most of them tended to say they had almost no experience with the tapir. And so I think that in this case, what you've got is a case where their expertise held them up. They're like, I'm going to get stressed trying to find those markers, and then they ended up not finishing. Thank you. Now, the second data set I want to show you real quickly is the average duration of fixation. So this is showing you, again, that our experts in general had shorter, and you can see this almost all the way through, fixations, so they're taking in more information more quickly than our novices are. Again, you'll notice, though, a couple things. There's that tapir phenomenon, also reversed. Not significant, though, by the way. These two are just similar between the expert and the novices. And you'll notice in the dog situation also that while it's the same pattern, it's non-significant. So all of a sudden, we look just like each other when we could do a common animal. So there were a couple other super quick findings. One was that for both experts and novices, longer fixations were correlated with higher confidence. So within your group, having a longer fixation meant that you probably felt a little bit better about your ratings. Second was that, as I just mentioned to you, the experts and novices did not differ when we used a common animal. So what does all this mean? First was that the blink phenomenon, this idea that we can do split-second judgments of others' emotional state, can be applied to non-human entities, which was one of the nice findings of this, that we could actually look at an animal and make judgments. Now, we still have some debate over how accurate their judgments were, but they could do this, which was kind of shocking. Second was that it does seem to be partially explained by the type of attention you use. So if you're paying attention to more things for shorter periods of time. The last thing that I wanted to mention to you was that expertise seems to be highly domain specific. So even these people who had spent almost 13 years on average working as keepers with similar animals, the minute we gave them a very unfamiliar animal or we gave them a very familiar animal, they looked like novices all over again. And so that should be it. Thank you.